I'm not so sure that we'll ever be able to totally dispel all of the opinions and rumors that have come from this.
You think it will go on being talked about and speculated over for years, decades to come?
Oh, I think that there are people that will never change their minds on it. Yes, because there's no way to really, truly prove it, because 92 or 93% of the remains of the aircraft and the people are still in that hole.
The small crater left by the plane is baffling to many people.
The conspiracy files claim that the 9/11 Truth movement regards the account of Flight 93 as
clear evidence of a government cover-up,
when in fact much of the 9/11 Truth movement accept that the evidence available is contradictory and therefore no firm assumptions can be made. In the absence of an air crash investigation report, no hard conclusions about the fate of Flight 93 can be reached. In comparison to the other major incidents that occurred on that day, there is nowhere near as much evidence to debate, but it appeared the BBC purposely wanted to exploit the critics' weakest arguments.
In a straight line, Indian Lake is just over a mile from the crash site, and the wind was blowing in that direction on September the 11th. But was wreckage found here?
They spent an inordinate amount of time on nebulous issues. Many of them had been acknowledged a long time before the programme aired.
Look at the physical evidence.
But we've talked to the people who were there. We've talked to Wally Miller, the local coroner, who arrived at the scene moments
who
later.
Went public 4 times and said that he didn't see any drops of bodies, or
yes.
he said it seemed as if the plane let its passengers off beforehand.
Exactly, and what that was a simile. He was talking, it looked as if that had happened.
Proving that researchers have made some miscalculated speculations does not in any way prove the official account correct. The official story is largely based on phone calls made from the passengers. Why then did the BBC choose not to examine these? Was it perhaps because there is credible information indicating the vast majority of the calls were not actually achievable? The conspiracy files looked at one example of where the US intelligence agencies failed to share vital information in the run-up to the attacks.
January 2000, 2 terrorists arrive in California from the Far East. Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar were known to be active members of an al-Qaeda cell. But it didn't arouse any suspicions when the smartly dressed young men presented their passports at immigration. Their names had not been added to the watch list for terrorist suspects. Al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar were allowed on their way unchallenged.
Welcome to Los Angeles International Airport. For your safety, please keep your personal belongings with you at all times.
They soon moved into a San Diego suburb and lived openly under their real names. They had come on a mission. And that's exactly what they did. At about the same time, a CIA cable confirmed that one of them was in the country, but this lead wasn't passed on to the FBI.
As a former counter-terrorist officer, I believe that these apparent lapses in communication are much more likely to have been intentional, rather than a result of incompetence, as the BBC implied. Someone in the CIA will have had to make a decision not to pass on that information. The BBC needed to ask who and why. The programme presented a former FBI agent who said that the FBI had no specific information in the run-up to 9/11.
I knew there was another attack planning. I knew there was another attack coming. And the obvious question behind that is, well, why didn't you do something about it? We had no specific information. It was just this gut feeling. It was just this, they're planning something. We would see the planning, the communications or whatever we were monitoring would drop off, and then you'd know, this is not a good time.
Why did the BBC not inform the viewer about the number of cases where FBI agents were kept from investigating al-Qaeda suspects in the run-up to 9/11? Back in the year 2000, FBI counter-terrorism agent Ken Williams was pulled off an investigation into suspected terrorists training at a flight school in Phoenix. In July 2001, he wrote a memo in which he stated that he believed al-Qaeda was planning an imminent airborne attack and recommended that flight schools throughout the US be investigated. The memo was apparently disregarded by FBI chiefs. Former FBI agent Colin Rowley claimed that the Bureau could have identified several of the hijackers before 9/11 if FBI HQ hadn't blocked an investigation in Minneapolis.
Now, in large organizations, you do have a breakdown of communication at the lower end. There was never any top-down orders either by the FBI or CIA, and anybody believes that's just, they're wrong.
Yet BBC journalist Greg Palast revealed that the FBI had been restricted from investigating members of the bin Laden family prior to 9/11, but the conspiracy files chose not to interview him.
I couldn't find a shred of evidence that George Bush knew about the September 11th attack coming. But why didn't our intelligence agencies know?
This document is marked secret and WF, which means it walked its way out of the Washington Bureau of the FBI. It indicates that before the attack of September 11th, agents had wanted to question two members of a very powerful family for their connections to a suspected terrorist organization, Omar and Abdullah bin Laden. But the agents weren't allowed to. Now, what makes this family so special that they're protected from investigation?
John O'Neill was regarded by many as the FBI's leading authority on al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. In August 2001, he resigned from his position in counter-terrorism at the Bureau, protesting that his investigations into bin Laden had been opposed and obstructed by the Bush White House in the interests of the US oil industry. In September 2001, he got a new job working in security at the World Trade Center, where he reportedly died on 9/11. Instead of analysing the information surrounding FBI whistleblowers, the BBC presented a CIA agent who stated,
"Certainly the idea that they couldn't be found within the United States is true, but only because the FBI is such an incompetent organization."
If the FBI was so incompetent, why then, according to the BBC, was it the CIA which failed to pass on information in time?
At last, 17 days before 9/11, the penny dropped. The CIA finally alerted the FBI. Had the two terrorists in San Diego been arrested, there was a chance that the whole plot could have been prized open, but they had long moved on and disappeared. It wasn't a lack of intelligence, it was a failure to act on that intelligence.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, then Director of the Pakistani Intelligence Services, Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed, had breakfast with Bob Graham, then Chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and with Porter Goss, then Chair of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. The BBC made no mention of the information linking Pakistani intelligence to tens of thousands of dollars wired to some of the alleged hijackers over the year prior to 9/11.
Newsnight has obtained a Ministry of Defence analysis which suggests that the ISI has been supporting terrorism.
Bob Graham and Porter Goss both have ties to the Bush administration and the US intelligence agencies. In February 2002, they became the chairman of the Joint Inquiry into Intelligence Community Activities before and after the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. This is the report that the programme based its assumptions on with regard to the incompetence theory. Although the programme included Graham, all the viewer was presented with was the official incompetence.